With the college football transfer portal wrapped up, it's time to take a look at the SEC and look how each team did in the transfer portal. Give them a grade, break down some of the players that they were able to bring to campus, and talk about what these teams should be looking for with these classes. Starting with the Alabama Crimson Tide, Kalen DeBoer needs to get off to a good start in 2026, and I don't necessarily know if this class is going to be the one that does it. There are some nice pieces in here. Guys like Terrence Green, Nick Brooks, those were some big signees, but this is a class that I think has a lot to prove. There are some familiar foes when you look at the players they're bringing in. You have guys coming in from Mississippi State, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Michigan, Washington. You have guys that are going to be very interesting to pay attention to. Underrated pickup here, in my opinion, is Caleb Woodson. I thought he did some good things for Virginia Tech, a natural playmaker that can help, especially at the linebacker position where you're losing guys like Deontay Lawson. Noah Rogers was a great pickup as well. I think with losing Jeremy Bernard, you lose Isaiah Horton. They're going to need a wide receiver to step up and replace those guys. Is that going to be Ryan Williams? We don't necessarily know. Noah Rogers could be that guy as well. Devin Tompkins, another good pickup. So giving them a B here, that's a solid class. I don't know if it's enough to turn things around where Kalen DeBoer needs things to be, but this is also a team that made the playoffs. So maybe it's headed in the wrong direction, but this is still a team that's giving themselves a chance. Ryan Silverfield takes over at Arkansas, and his first transfer portal class is huge, but I don't necessarily know where the quality players are going to be coming in. We'll see, obviously, as the offseason progresses. When we do the deep dive series, maybe I'll have my mind changed, but right now I just see a team with a C+ transfer portal class. There are some players that are solid. Carter Stoutmeyer was an interesting pickup for them in the secondary, but again, you're going to see 42 transfers. It's unlikely you're going to get a ton of quality players, but there are some. I'm curious what a guy like Chris Marshall can do. You look at what his path has been so far in college football. He is on Arkansas now, a team that is going to have a little bit of a different look in the passing attack. Silverfield did bring in some players from Memphis as well, so that's going to be something to pay attention to. But I also like some of the guys they were able to bring in, like a Hunter Osborne, like a Jaheim Johnson. I think Jaheim Johnson did great things for Tulane this past season, and he could do the same thing for Arkansas. It's just going to be tougher in a much tougher conference. We talked about the Memphis players. What can guys like Josiah Clemens, Sutton Smith? I really like the pickup of AJ Hill, getting him to transfer from Memphis to Arkansas. There are some questions. I mean, I brought this up before. How long was Memphis going to be able to keep AJ Hill? And Ryan Silverfield leaving was a concern. AJ Hill follows him to Arkansas. Maybe he's going to be the starting quarterback. We will see. But again, when you look at some of the grades, if you want to look at that, you're going to see a lot of solid grades, but is that enough to get Arkansas where they need to be? Christian Harrison was a starter for Cincinnati. He was solid. I think the addition of Kamori House is huge. I thought House had a lot of different options in terms of where he could have ended up. So getting to Arkansas and Arkansas signing him is a good pickup for them. But again, not a ton of big names that are going to wow you. So C+ for Arkansas. We'll see how this shakes out, but there are some new faces to pay attention to. Auburn's portal class really depends on how you feel about the USF transfers. If you think that they are going to be significantly better than what they had last year, then you're probably going to think that this grade is terrible. But I give them a B-. I am not sold on the idea that the USF transfers are going to be that much better. I think they bring some stability. So in that case, I think they found the right fits. Alex Golesh brings in a number of players. But I don't necessarily know how I feel about some of the players that are replacing the talent that they lost. There is that factor as well. But I do like bringing in Deshaun Womack. I think that he could have gone to a number of other places, decides to go to Auburn from Ole Miss. But again, you're going to see guys like Cole Best. Is that necessarily an upgrade? It's not, in my opinion. When you look at the offensive line that Auburn had last year, he's just familiar with the system. So that is going to be a benefit. But in terms of talent, in terms of the level of play, does that make them better? That's a question that I have about this team. And again, we're going to dive into deep dive series, look at the Auburn Tigers, and maybe my opinion will change from now and then. We'll see. Bryson Washington was a huge pickup in my opinion. I think that is a great addition by Alex Golesh. I think that he was very fun to watch at Baylor, was a very good runner, very productive runner. So that's one that I do like. But then we talked about the USF transfers. Jeremiah Koger, player that is a potential rising star there. Nakai Davenport. Can he take things to the next level? I think that you have a number of USF transfers that are familiar with Golesh's system, which there is something to be said about that. So in terms of fit, there's a lot of good fits, but I don't necessarily know what that means in terms of elevating the talent and the level of play. Wide receiver is a position that I'm going to have questions about. You look at the number of talented players that Auburn lost last year. Granted, they didn't have a ton of production, but nobody in this class is replacing Cam Coleman. You can make an argument that nobody in this class is replacing Malcolm Simmons. Now, when you look at the other guys that they lost, you could make an argument that these guys coming in, Keyshawn Singleton is a very good wide receiver. I think that he's going to be fun to watch, but if he is wide receiver one, he's not Cam Coleman. You also look at who you're bringing in with Chaz Nimrod. Can he stay healthy? Is he going to be wide receiver two? There's plenty of other options, as you saw, but that's the question that I have. Byron Brown, to me, is a massive upgrade at the quarterback position. You look what Auburn had at the quarterback position, and outside of Deuce Knight, there was nothing there that had me believing they were going to be an explosive offense. And for whatever reason, they decided that the freshman wasn't the solution. That was very strange. But bringing in Byron Brown is a great addition, in my opinion. I think that's a huge pickup for Alex Golesh because he could have gone a number of places as well. So there are some nice pieces, but overall, I think that this is a class that will bring some stability. It will make them better overall, but there are not a ton of huge names that I think this is going to be a massive upgrade over the roster that we saw last year. Florida's kind of in that same boat in a way. I don't really love a lot of the players that they bring in, but I'll touch on a couple of them that I think were very good or very underrated. Eric Singleton Jr. coming back into Buster Faulkner's offense is going to be tremendous. I think that's going to be a very fun combination to watch. And it just comes down to the quarterback position, which we'll talk about here in just a second. You bring in a familiar face for Buster Faulkner in Luke Harpring. That's a guy at tight end that could be a difference maker. Jordan Lowry had an interesting season at ECU. That's another guy to keep an eye on in the secondary. The big name that everybody's going to focus on is the quarterback, but when you look at the talent around him, there's going to be some interesting pieces to watch. London Montgomery led ECU in rushing. That's a nice addition for the Florida Gators. TJ Shanahan coming in from Penn State. Bailey Stockton joining Faulkner from Georgia Tech to Florida as well. Evan Pryor was solid for Cincinnati. So there are some names that I will enjoy watching, but just because I enjoy them doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the biggest additions. Lakota Dipre from James Madison, a guy who is a very solid contributor for the Dukes last year as well. Aaron Philo is the big X factor here. Assuming that he wins the quarterback position, the quarterback battle, that is going to be one where I'm going to watch what he does, see what he's capable of doing, and I think that is going to be the big deciding factor of if Florida's class truly was a success or not. He has a lot of interesting players around him. He has a lot of different guys that could potentially be factors for him. But again, this class is more of a, I need to see it before I believe it. Georgia's class was not big. You're only bringing in 9 transfers, but that speaks to the recruiting of the Georgia Bulldogs. So that's not necessarily a concern. I'm not worried about Georgia. The class here, I give it an A-. I think that they hit on a number of players that I really like, players that have a lot of upside still. And even though some of them I'm not sold on, there are some big names that I think are going to be huge contributors for them this year. Isaiah Canyon is going to be one of them. The wide receiver position is kind of up in the air right now for Georgia. He is going to be a fun contributor in that offense. Same thing with Dante Dowdell. You look at what he did at Kentucky, look what he did in Nebraska. That's a guy who gives them another piece in what's going to be a talented running back room. So that's going to be fun to watch. Jamar Lee Riddle, that's a big name to me. I don't think a lot of people know his name, but you look at what he did at ECU, natural playmaker, whether that's at the line of scrimmage, deep downfield. That's a guy who can make things happen anywhere on the field. He's going to be fun to watch in the secondary. Gentry Williams, if he can have the season that Georgia expects from him, he's going to be fun to watch as well. That's a secondary that is going to get two players here already. We'll talk about a third here in just a second that have good experience that are going to help the experience in that secondary to make them better. Amaris Williams coming in from Auburn. That's a big name as well. I like that pickup for the Georgia Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. The other one that I'll touch on here, Khalil Barnes. Khalil Barnes had a number of potential transfer landing spots. We talked about him as a potential Georgia Bulldog. We talked about him as a potential player on a number of other schools. Khalil Barnes gives you an experienced player from the Clemson Tigers who's played big time football, and he is going to give you that experience and that talent that's going to help this secondary. So Georgia did a lot of good things. Overall, give it an A-. I wouldn't really give it an A. I'd kind of like to see a couple other names maybe to boost that, a couple of big names to boost that. I think the wide receiver position, if they were able to get a Cam Coleman or something like that, that is another thing that could have boosted their class, but still a very good class for Kirby Smart. First year head coach Will Stein did a great job in the transfer portal. I'm giving Kentucky an A because we're not used to seeing these types of classes join the Kentucky Wildcats. And there were some concerns about maybe where the direction of the Kentucky program was going. That's why they made a change. They bring in Will Stein. And I think that right off the bat, you're seeing talented players that are going to be very fun to watch for the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, guys that can make a big impact if they're able to stay on the field and reach their ceiling, nobody's going to do that more than Nick Anderson. Nick Anderson is a big body, explosive receiver that at his peak can stretch the field deep, can be a big time playmaker for the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, injuries have been a concern. That is the biggest question with Nick Anderson. Is he going to be able to stay on the field? Can he stay healthy? Those are questions that Kentucky fans are probably going to worry about with his game. Fortunately, there is talent that's coming in that will help ease some of those concerns, but if he stays on the field, he can stay healthy. He's shown that he can be back to almost 100%. That's a guy who can be a difference maker. He can stretch the field vertically. That opens things up for the rest of the offense. That gives them balance. That puts them in good positions for other guys to win in the short to intermediate areas. Those are going to be things that he can do single-handedly. That's how good of a player he was at Oklahoma. The experiment at LSU didn't work out, but he is still that type of player that can be a huge difference maker for the right team. But as you can see, they brought in other wide receivers to kind of give them some security if that doesn't work out. You bring in Brock Kaufman from Louisville. You bring in Xavier Daisy from UAB. So they brought in some other guys that are going to compete, maybe not necessarily with Nick Anderson, but gives this offense some interesting players to potentially watch. Same thing with Ja'Caden Ferguson. So you have plenty of wide receiver talent that's going to be helpful in that regard. Elijah Barnes from Texas, that's another linebacker that comes in, especially with Kentucky's defense having some of the issues that it's had in the last couple of years. Bringing in a talented player that could potentially fix some of those things is going to be incredibly helpful. You're also going to see some big names. I think the offensive line is where Kentucky really thrived. You see Tegra Shabola. That's a guy who can be an instant starter, an instant impact player, especially at a key position. The offensive line is going to be a huge part of this. When you look at what Will Stein had at Oregon, the offensive line was a big reason why Oregon had success. They were mauling teams. They were moving defensive lines off the line of scrimmage, creating big gaps. And if you're going to expect success from your team, from your offense, the offensive line has to play a big role in that. So I like that they address the offensive line, and Shabola is going to be just one of those guys. Colton Price, another big name from Baylor. Lance Hurd, those two, kind of a surprise that they chose Kentucky, especially again, where people felt Kentucky was going with the direction that the program appeared to be heading. This was kind of a surprise to see them get some bigger names. So the three guys we just talked about have the potential to turn things around quickly, and they're bigger names that are kind of a surprise to choose Kentucky over a number of different schools. So you're going to see how different this can be and what exactly Will Stein had envisioned when he brings in talent like this. So purely based off those three guys, you're going to see a much better team that's on the field in 2026. And it's a big reason why I like Kentucky's class so much. Javonte Barnes, another guy kind of similar to Nick Anderson. If he can rediscover his confidence, rediscover his play, that's a guy who could be very fun to watch in the running back room. We'll talk about another guy here in just a little bit. Jordan Castell, a multi-year starter for the Florida Gators. That's another big name to bring in on the defense. Has the experience, has SEC experience that's going to help this defense and join that secondary that, as you can see in this list, bringing in quite a few players to help turn things around. Lots of exciting players. Kenny Minchey probably is going to be the biggest one that everybody looks at. Kenny Minchey comes from Notre Dame, didn't win the starting job. He lost a job to CJ Carr. Now, this really depends. How you feel about him depends on how you think the quarterback battle at Notre Dame went. If you think Kenny Minchey was in the running, was in contention, you probably are very excited about what Kenny Minchey can do. And also the combination of Kenny Minchey with his talent joining Will Stein. Will Stein is going to help him tremendously. This offense is going to give him quite a few opportunities to make plays. And there's a reason why people wanted Kenny Minchey out of the transfer portal. So Kentucky winning that, once again, another big win for this team, for this class. And I think that if he can develop with his skill set and he can take the steps as a first-time starter, you're looking at a guy that's going to be a big-time surprise to a lot of people in 2026. Very talented quarterback. There's a reason, again, why people wanted him, why so many teams were after him. And if he can kind of settle in nicely and work with the talent around him, you're going to see a team that takes huge strides. The last guy that I'll point out is CJ Baxter. I thought CJ Baxter had plenty of opportunities to go really anywhere he wanted. And obviously this past year, it didn't work out for him. The season just didn't go how Texas wanted. The rushing attack was disappointing. CJ Baxter, if he can show that, hey, this was just kind of a fluke year and get back to what we thought he could be 2 years ago, you're looking at a guy that could have a breakout season for Kentucky in 2026. That's another talented running back that can be a home run hitter. And you combine that with Kenny Minchey and the talent that we already talked about, this is a Kentucky offense that's going to be a massive problem for the SEC. And I don't necessarily know if that means, they're going to be a contender. I'm not going to go that far yet, but I do think this is a program that got better because of the transfer portal. So it's going to be fun to watch what Will Stein can do. It's going to be interesting to see what some of these players are capable of doing and how they can make this program instantly better this season. It's not really a surprise to see Lane Kiffin thrive in the transfer portal, but at the same time, I think that there were people that didn't believe he could do what he did this year. And LSU is going to be a better team. It's just going to be how much better can they actually be. With some of the names that they were able to bring in, not just from Ole Miss, this is a team that's going to be very fun to watch and plenty of new faces that once again help Lane Kiffin live up to the nickname Portal King. Prince Will Umanmielen is a difference maker on the edge, and he probably could have gone pro, probably could have had a number of other schools to go to, but he decides to follow his head coach to LSU. Same thing with TJ Daugherty. Those are two starters for Ole Miss that are going to join LSU, and the Tigers are losing some talent on the defensive side of the ball, so you need guys to replace them. What better way to do that than getting proven commodities to do exactly that, to get them where they need to be to bring their portal class up to this grade, which I give them an A because they have so many big names that are going to make a difference instantly. Now, is that going to make this team a contender? I don't necessarily know that, but I do know they're going to be better. Jordan Seaton was another addition that a lot of people were curious to watch. A guy who did some good things for Colorado and is a very talented offensive tackle that is going to help this offense. This is an offense that had a lot of struggles in 2025, and bringing in Jordan Seaton helps some of those issues. Now, he can't do it all by himself. There's 4 other guys that are going to play on the offensive line, obviously, but Jordan Seaton is going to give you a tackle that is a consistent player. You see that the grade that he gets, you're looking at a guy that's an instant impact type player. And when you look, if you just look at the grades, you're going to see what the industry thinks, specifically 24/7, but what the industry thinks of these players. If you go to On3, all these other rankings, you're going to see these guys have similar grades near the top. That's how good this class was. Devin Harper follows Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss. Winston Watkins, another guy that we didn't really know coming into last year. That's a guy who can help this wide receiver room. And that's going to be someone who's familiar with Lane Kiffin's system, Charlie Weiss Jr.'s system, and that's going to be a huge addition as well. So it's not just the huge names. There are guys like Winston Watkins that are very talented that are going to make an impact as well. Husan Longstreet decided to transfer from USC, and I'm curious why. Because he is in the same situation that he was in with USC. He's going to be the backup. He's going to be second string at best. He's already had that at USC. So I'm curious what the money looked like. We'll see, but he didn't get to a better situation. So maybe he feels that he's in a better place with Lane Kiffin, but you're also leaving Lincoln Riley. So that was an interesting departure, but a big win for LSU in that regard as well. Jordan Ross, that's a guy who Tennessee had high hopes for in his time in Knoxville. Now he joins LSU with a chance to build upon his 2025 season. That's a very exciting addition, and one that I don't think a lot of people are talking about because some of the bigger names are kind of overshadowing him in a way there. Sam Levitt is the other guy that's going to get a lot of attention. Sam Levitt was a very interesting case to watch, a very interesting player to watch in terms of the transfer portal. His recruitment was very, very interesting. A lot of people were curious where he was going to go. At one point, he was linked to Kentucky, so that was going to be an interesting fit, but ultimately he lands at LSU. He gives them kind of what they wanted from their quarterback position last year, and I think Sam Levitt on the 2025 LSU Tigers would have been a big-time difference maker that would have helped this offense more. Garrett Nussmeier just didn't have the mobility. The passing obviously wasn't great either, and Michael Van Buren just didn't have the passing that they wanted. Sam Levitt kind of gives you both of those things, and putting him in Lane Kiffin's offense should only make him that much more dangerous. Now, one of the questions they have is maybe what is his health status? Is he going to be able to stay on the field? But I like what he's been able to do. You look at what he did 2 years ago for Arizona State. I think that you can see exactly why this team is so excited about what they're getting with him. Other names to point out, Ty Benefield, I think is going to be a great addition for this secondary. A guy that's going to be able to play near the line of scrimmage and have no problems be physical, but also can make plays on the back end there. UG Wilson III and Trey Brown III are going to give you 2 different types of wide receivers. Assuming Eugene Wilson can stay healthy, he's going to be a fun player in the slot. Trey Brown is that bigger, lankier receiver that's going to be that vertical threat coming from Old Dominion. Jace Brown, though, is really the one that I like the most because I think that he fits really well in Lane Kiffin's offense. And we've seen what a player like Jace Brown can do. Kansas State, at times when they needed a big play, it was Jace Brown that made those plays. Jace Brown was the one that consistently stepped up and delivered. He is going to do a lot of great things with LSU because he has the ability to play big time in big moments. Jackson Harris coming from Hawaii. I'm curious how his transition is. He had a big year with Hawaii this past year. He was a big time vertical threat for that offense. And what is he going to be able to do to duplicate that, to replicate that success. You're going against tougher competition, but the nice thing is we've already pointed out there is plenty of talent around him where teams can't just focus on him. So you're seeing big names are the highlight of LSU's class. There are some other ones that do need to prove themselves and some other ones that we haven't even really touched on, but there's going to be a lot of exciting things coming from LSU this year. You can see some of the other names that we didn't touch on here, but plenty of exciting talent, plenty of upgrades at key positions and positions that were maybe a little bit of a disappointment last year. So this is going to be a fun class to pay attention to. And once again, Lane Kiffin has done a lot of great things in the transfer portal. Jeff Lebby's actually doing some really interesting things in the portal. I think he's doing a good job, and I'm going to give this class a B. I do like some of the players they're bringing in, and obviously there's some names that maybe they're hoping will take some steps. So guys like Tyler Miller, Jordan Gilbert are coming from LSU. Dalen Evans is coming from Texas A&M. So you're going to see some familiar faces that maybe this team has seen before. Are they going to be able to step in to their positions and compete right away, start right away? That's maybe where you have some of those questions there. Amari Williams coming in from Florida State. You saw the few other Florida State transfers there. Jaden Rashada is kind of a name that everyone knows, but what is his role going to be with the offense? DJ Chester is a versatile player on the offensive line. I really like that pickup for them. Maybe not the most talented offensive lineman, but an experienced player that can play multiple positions. I think that Mississippi State got a good one there as well. Other names to keep an eye on: Marquise Johnson. What is he going to be able to do coming from Missouri? Didn't have a huge year for the Tigers, but a very talented player that is capable of having maybe a more explosive season. You also see some familiar names: Jamrock Grimsley coming from Florida, Kendall Doby from Oklahoma. So this is a team that I thought did a good job of bringing in not only players that people know, but players that I think upgrade their roster. AJ Swan, another quarterback to keep an eye on there. We're going to see what the quarterback position looks like for Mississippi State. That's competition there, so that's going to be, I think, very good. Quentin Taylor Jr., I thought he could have gone to plenty of other schools, and he decides to go to Mississippi State. That will be interesting to see what he can do for that secondary. We already talked about a couple players that are going to help in that regard. So that's going to be another player to keep an eye on. The offensive line gets some boosts from Miles McVay, Brandon Snee. You're looking at guys that are going to potentially make an impact and give this team more depth at worst. So I really like this class. I think it's a solid class. I'm going to give it a B. I like what Mississippi State's doing. They had a breakthrough season last year, and we'll see how they can build upon that in 2026. Missouri's class is a lot of potential, and if that potential can turn into production, this is going to be a very interesting class that can have a massive impact on Missouri's success. And we'll talk about a couple of key players that are going to help with that. Getting Caden Lee is one of my favorite pickups for this class. I think that he is going to be very fun to watch in this offense. It really just comes down to the quarterback position and how they get him the football. Chris Graves Jr. is another solid addition, but on defense, I think that that was a huge win for this staff and another guy that's going to be an impactful player this year. Caleb Goody had a breakthrough season at Cincinnati. He's going to be fun to watch for the quarterback position, which gets us to Austin Simmons. Austin Simmons did not have a great start to his season in 2025 with Ole Miss. That being said, I think he's still tremendously talented. I think he still has good football in him. And I think that this is an offense that's going to give him opportunities to shine. I think he's going to come in and compete, and he's going to get an opportunity to show, hey, this is why teams wanted me coming out of high school. This is why I'm still a talented quarterback. Now, he's trying to get back to 100% after the injury. That played a role in his struggles, but I think he's going to be a very fun player to watch. Overall, this class is solid. I'm going to give it a B. We talked about the big names that I really like, but you can look at this class and see where they could potentially shine. Other two that I'm going to point out here: Josh Atkins is an experienced player from Arizona State, has playoff experience. That's going to be fun to watch. in the offensive line. And Jalil Florence coming in from Oregon. That's another cornerback to keep an eye on there. He and Chris Graves will be really fun to watch in this defense this year. I'm going to start by saying, even though I'm giving Oklahoma a C on their transfer portal class, I think this is going to be a good team once again in 2026. I think the bigger questions that I have to deal with John Mateer and what he can do to develop. That being said, there are a couple players that are going to be fun to watch for Oklahoma. Trail Harris is one of them. After what he did at Virginia, that's a solid piece for them to get. Amarian Harris, the offensive line for Oklahoma needs to improve. So bringing in a guy like Harris, Peyton Joseph, those are guys that could potentially elevate that group, which then in turn makes John Mateer better. But it's going to be a question for me for the time being. Parker Livingstone is, I like the story with Parker Livingstone, but I do wonder how much he helps this Oklahoma wide receiver room. Now, he does give them some consistency in terms of playmaking, but is he going to do that enough? Isaiah Satenga coming back is huge, but Parker Livingstone could be a nice complement if he's able to be consistent. There's a reason why Texas essentially told him to go in the portal, so that could be something that factors in. And when you look at the rest of this class, you're not seeing a ton of huge names, but guys, again, that need to prove themselves, which will be fun. If they're able to prove themselves, then I'm going to be wrong about this class. I'm going to be wrong about what this class's grade should be. And Oklahoma, like I said, is already going to be good. Anybody that's able to help them improve more from this class is going to make them a potentially great team this year. Even though Ole Miss lost the quote-unquote portal king, they have a new era that's going to be potentially just as good in the transfer portal. Giving Ole Miss an A-. I like what they did in the transfer portal. They bring in not only a pretty big class of 29 guys, but they bring in guys that I really like that are going to make an impact right off the bat. And they did not waste any time with getting those bigger names to come in. Now, the Luke Farrelly case was very interesting case to follow, if you will. The debate surrounding how he got to Ole Miss, we're not going to dive into that, but that's a solid player who was a big-time playmaker for Cal this past year. Tommy Kinsler IV, Miami's offensive line was solid. It was deep. He's a talented player that should have a very interesting impact on this offensive line. Jordan Renaud coming in from Alabama, kind of the same thing for his position. Walker Howard's a familiar face that should be interesting to watch in the quarterback competition. Blake Purchase, and I should say in the backup quarterback competition. Now that Trinidad Chambliss is coming back, that's huge. So in a way, that also kind of gives them more of a win going into 2026. Not necessarily portal related, but Trinidad Chambliss is a former transfer portal player that is very fun to watch for this team. Blake Purchase, a guy who did a lot of great things for Oregon on the edge. That's another big pickup for them, especially with some of the players that they lost. So you're going to see plenty of talent that's ready to replace departing players. And we're not going to talk about the departing players, but this is a group that I think is going to be very fun to watch this year. JT Lindsay could be very interesting at the running back position. Again, it's Kewan Lacey's show, but they do need plenty of depth to help him out as well. Other names that I think could make this class really, really good, Jonte Cook and Daryl Gill Jr., two Syracuse transfers that are looking to prove themselves at a much more difficult level. Those are guys that are going to be very explosive, can take the top off the defense. If they're able to do that, this is going to be a fun class that's going to be considered much better than what I even have them here. An A- is very good, but there are guys that can take this to another level. Getting Deuce Knight as well, that was a huge win for this staff. I think that Pete Golding did a lot of good things in the transfer portal, but getting Deuce Knight, especially when Trinidad Chambliss' status was kind of in limbo, that was a huge win. Now you get a chance to let him sit back and watch Trinidad Chambliss and watch what he can potentially do for the development of Deuce Knight, and you don't have to worry about stressing him. I don't like how Auburn handled Deuce Knight. I don't like how they used him and then just stopped using him. So I like that he gets a new opportunity and a chance to prove himself with a new team. Other guys that have experience that are going to be really fun to watch. The next three, honestly, are three of my favorites. Troy Everett, experienced player from Oklahoma. Sharif Denson, who plays the game with a chip on his shoulder. And Keaton Thomas, productive player for Baylor. There are a lot of guys in this class that I really enjoyed watching last year, and I think they're going to be fun to watch for Ole Miss. Jonathan Maldonado is an extremely lanky player that has a lot of upside. I think that if he can add a little bit of weight to his frame, he is going to be an extremely dangerous player on the edge for Ole Miss. And that's an Ole Miss defense that has some holes to replace and to fill, and he's one of those guys that could play a role in that as well. Michael Burrow, another guy that is going to play on that defensive line, experienced player from Florida. That's a Florida defensive line that did have quite a bit of depth, so it is fun to watch what some of these new players or these players coming from there can do in their new homes. Carius Kern is going to be fun to watch on the offensive line. Carius Kern had a lot of opportunities with LSU and decides ultimately that he's going to head elsewhere. He joins Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is going to have a very fun offensive line with the returning talent they have, plus a guy like Carius Kern. Jay Crawford's another Auburn defender that's going to be really fun to watch at Ole Miss. Very good at what he does. Same thing with Edwin Joseph from Florida State. Experienced starters that are going to come in and I think have an instant impact on this group. So that's going to be really interesting to watch as well. Other guys to keep an eye on with in terms of potential: Tony Mitchell from Mississippi State, Horatio Fields from Auburn. He initially transferred from Wake Forest to Auburn. Things didn't really work out, but it'll be interesting to see if he can contribute to this offensive group. Mekhi Frazier coming in from Michigan State, same thing. Michael Smith coming from South Carolina as a tight end. So there are plenty of players to watch with Ole Miss. And again, this is a good class for Pete Golding and the Rebels. Shane Beamer and South Carolina enter a pivotal year in 2026, and I'm going to give their class a B-. 25 players coming in, not necessarily a huge class in terms of instant impact players, big names, but I think that their success is tied more to the returning talent they have on their roster, more so than the players that they bring in. That being said, a guy like Christian Clark could be really fun to watch in this offense. Kendall Briles is going to bring a lot of interesting concepts to this team, and somebody like Christian Clark could have a big impact. Now, Jacarius Peake's status is going to be in question right now. What is he going to look like when the season comes around? The injury right now is kind of the big news with him. If he's able to go, he's going to be one of the more exciting players to watch in this class. Big time playmaker who's coming from NC State, did a lot of good things as a starter there and is hoping to do the same thing for South Carolina. They just need him to stay healthy. Caleb Herring was explosive, very disruptive for Tennessee, and I think he has a lot of great opportunities. And we talked about this earlier this offseason. Dylan Stewart gives whoever is playing opposite of him a ton of opportunities. He gives that player great chances to get one-on-one matchups and showcase their talent. A guy like Caleb Herring could be that guy. Whoever lines up opposite of Dylan Stewart is going to have a fun year because they're going to have so many exciting matchups for them to take things to another level. As you can see here, plenty of offensive line talent coming in. The offensive line was I think a big concern for South Carolina, and the talent that they brought in is going to ensure that that's not a problem this year. So overall, a pretty decent class. I think that some of it is kind of hoping you're kind of going with quantity, and eventually some of those guys are going to hit. So we'll see. I'm giving them a B-, but again, I think a lot of it has to do with the development of Lenora Sellers and other players that do return, but some solid pieces in this class nonetheless. Josh Heupel identified the weaknesses in his team, and he used the transfer portal to hopefully fix a lot of them. You look at what he brings in, and right off the bat, you're going to see, well, let's see, what was the problem last year? The secondary needs some replacements, that's for sure. These first 5 guys you see are all going to be in the secondary. The defense had its issues last year, and the secondary hopefully will be better than it was last year. Now, Jermon McCoy's status was always going to be a tough thing to overcome. Him being injured didn't exactly make things easy. But you can see you bring in Jadaeus Richard, Tevis Metcalf, TJ Metcalf, Isaiah Harge, DeJuan Lane, 5 guys that we'll see if things pan out, but the talent level is there. The experience is there. That's big. Amari Campbell coming in from Penn State as well. That's a linebacker who was once at North Carolina, went to Penn State, experienced player, knows what to do when he's on defense. That's another good addition in my opinion. Quay Moss coming in from Kansas State, kind of the same thing. Where they really, I think, won the transfer portal, if you will, is defensive line. Xavier Gilliam had a ton of offers, a ton of places he could have gone, decides that he's going to Tennessee. We'll talk about another guy here in just a little bit. Now, the quarterback position is where I think a lot of people probably felt that Tennessee dropped the ball. I'm still going to give them a B+ here because I like this class, but quarterback, win at quarterback, whether they were to get, Sam Levitt, Brendan Sorsby, anybody that they could have gotten would have made this class an A in my opinion. I think that they were in a tough spot with the Joey Aguilar situation, and obviously now that he's not able to play, now they're kind of at a tough spot. Ryan Staub doesn't do anything for me. I don't think that he is going to be in the competition for starting quarterback, but he's going to give them another quarterback that has experience from Colorado. So that's where I think they could have found other ways to improve, but it's not for a lack of trying. I know that I don't know for sure, but it's everything I've seen and heard. It sounds like they wanted to get a quarterback and it just didn't work out. But they did a lot of great things elsewhere. Javen Gordon's going to be interesting running back to watch. Kane Lee, very good corner to add to this team as well. So again, that secondary is in a great spot. The other guy that I really like is Chaz Coleman. That's a guy who could have a tremendous impact on this defense, on the defensive line. Lots to be excited about with bringing in Xavier Gilliam and bringing in Chaz Coleman. That's going to be a fun duo to watch. And this is a team that understood what was wrong with it. It brought in players to potentially fix that. And when you look at what they're going to have next year with Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator, this is a team that could be a major problem for the SEC. When it was all said and done, I was kind of surprised that Texas brought in 19 transfers. I was kind of surprised at how big their class was compared to what I thought it was going to be. But it was clear that Steve Sarkisian was not happy with how things went, and he was going to ensure that this year went differently. Now, some of the names they brought in, I think that if you look at even just these first 4 players here, it's not your typical class for Texas. The typical players you're bringing in are maybe more proven commodities, but this is a different time. So a guy like Marcus Boswell, not necessarily someone that you expect go from Akron to Texas. Lawrence Seymour coming in from Western Kentucky, 2 Wake Forest transfers. Those aren't the schools that you typically expect Texas to bring talent in from. But again, this is a different era. Coaches are going to have to spread their resources to look all over the country. And I like the players that they bring in here. And offensive line is going to be very interesting to watch this year. Texas needs Arch Manning to have a good year. And if they're able to keep him upright and allow him to thrive like he did towards the end of the year, you're going to see a much different Texas team. But the offensive line, keeping Arch Manning upright and able to make plays is a huge part of this. So Lawrence Seymour is going to be part of that competition as well. Melvin Siani, another guy coming in from Wake Forest. Jonte Newman from Texas A&M. You're seeing where Texas identified their concerning positions and what they did to address it. So you have to give them props for identifying those concerns and then also bringing in the players that are going to fix those concerns. That's really where I think Texas is doing a good job, and that's why I give them an A- here. MJ Morris coming in isn't going to be someone that competes for the starting job, but a name that I think people are familiar with. Former NC State transfer, was at Coastal Carolina. Now he's at Texas. Raleek Brown is one of the players that we'll talk about that are the big names that everybody paid attention to. The running back room was, I think, talented last year, but did not live up to expectations. And the rushing attack was not great. And again, this is another thing that you have to give Steve Sarkisian credit, because Raleek Brown's going to, I think, fix a lot of the problems that they have. An explosive player, and could have decided to go elsewhere when another running back that we'll talk about here in just a second came in, but decides to stick with the Longhorns. And now they have a formidable 1-2 punch to give Arch Manning a great combination in the backfield, and also give Steve Sarkisian a lot more options when it comes to play calling. They're going to give him a lot of exciting opportunities on that side of the ball. Racine Biles is the other guy that we'll talk about here before we scroll down some more. Linebacker was going to be a concern for Texas, not because there's not talent, but because who's going to be the starters this year? Anthony Hill and Trey Moore did a lot of exciting things for Texas. Biles is going to give them kind of a similar play coming in from Pitt. Had a big year in 2025, and now he basically transitioned that into an opportunity with the Longhorns in 2026. The big win that everybody's talking about, though, is Cam Coleman. Cam Coleman is a wide receiver that had pretty much his pick of the litter where he wanted to go. Every school, if you ask them, do you want Cam Coleman on their roster, should have said yes if they were asked that question, because that's how good he is. Auburn's misuse of him, or lack of use of him, was very disappointing, and Texas is going to be grateful that that worked out that way, because they win the Cam Coleman sweepstakes. He could have gone to a ton of other schools. Texas Tech wanted him. That was a huge win for the Texas Longhorns. You also get a win, not just because you get a talented player, but because you look at this offense, there was a lack of consistent vertical threats in Texas offense last year. And Arch Manning has an arm that needs to be unleashed even more after what we saw this past season. Cam Coleman gives you that consistent vertical threat. He's a big-time playmaker that can make highlight reel catches. He gives you that vertical threat to stretch out the offense, but also balance it out. And with the talent that they're bringing in, that's going to help other guys because he's there. You also look at what he joins in terms of wide receiver room. Ryan Wingo, you look at Emmett Mosley. Those are two guys that will be very fun to watch, but now they're even more exciting because of Cam Coleman's arrival. A name that kind of flies under the radar for this class specifically, Ian Gifford. I think that Texas has had success at the defensive tackle position, and he is just the latest in that long line. They've done a great job of identifying talent in the transfer portal at that position, and I think that the portal hit rate they've had with that position is very exciting to watch. Another guy that we'll talk about Bo Masco here. I think that Bo Masco is another player that flies under the radar in this class because of the offensive talent. Everybody talks about Arch Manning and what he can do. And obviously, Arch Manning is going to be a big name for people to pay attention to. But I think that the defense is adding some players that are going to make an impact as well. We talked about Racine Biles. Bo Masco had a big year for Rutgers, and Texas won the opportunity for him to play on their team in the portal. Again, had plenty of opportunities wherever he wanted to go, and he chooses Texas. This is a secondary that's going to be very talented once again, very fun to watch, but it was clear they needed a corner to step in and compete right away. Masco is going to be that guy. The last guy we'll talk about is Hollywood Smothers. We talked about Raleek Brown and what he can do. Hollywood Smothers was a game changer for NC State. Now he gets a chance to do that in a Steve Sarkisian system that's going to probably give him more opportunities that benefit his skill set even more, even better. I think that he is going to be very fun to watch because you saw what he did for NC State, the explosive playmaking, the home run type runs. That's going to be fun. You pair him with Raleek Brown, and now teams have to worry about, okay, well, who's going to get the ball and what do we have to do to stop him? That's going to be really fun. And if, at worst, it means that you have a guy that's going to be coming in and you have two players really that give you good depth. So when one guy needs a break, another guy comes in and you don't sacrifice quality of play. You are getting two big time playmakers that are going to make an impact, and Texas is a much better team because of it. So this class, great. This class, I think, solves a lot of the problems that Texas has coming into 2026. And the big names that they bring in is a huge reason why they're going to be so fun to watch this year. Overall, Texas A&M's class is solid. I'm going to give them a B. I think that they brought in some very interesting names in terms of who can take the next step or get better than what we saw from them last year. Now, the big one I really like is Isaiah Horton. You lose Casey Concepcion and you have a talented group of wide receivers coming back, but you almost wanted to replace Concepcion in terms of experience and ability. Isaiah Horton comes in at 6'4", and he is going to be a very fun player to watch in this offense. Now, there's plenty of change in this offense, but Isaiah Horton gives you a playmaker that can step up and help with that transition. Anto Saka is a very interesting player to watch on the edge from Northwestern. Another big win for Texas A&M there. Wilkin Formby. Alabama was excited about what they had in him, and now Texas A&M gets to have that excitement. And the offensive line is going to need some guys to replace, and Formby could be one of those guys. Tight end position is one that Texas A&M address. You see Richie Anderson, Houston Thomas. Those are two guys that you probably don't necessarily know, but solid players that have lots of potential to help this passing attack. Ricky Gibson, the third, coming in from Tennessee, experienced player for the Volunteers there as well. So this is a class that, in my opinion, has some good names, but there are also some almost like prove it in a way. Can you play at this level? Ray Coney's a perfect example. Came from East Tennessee to Tulsa, and now he's at Texas A&M. Can he handle that different level of play, or is he going to be a little bit overwhelmed? He's a playmaker. He's going to be fun to watch, but another guy that in this class, I think there are some guys that you're going to want to see them prove it, but still a class that is exciting. It's a solid class, and it's going to be a B for me for Texas A&M. Final class we'll talk about is Vanderbilt. Going to give them a B as well. I think they bring in a lot of players that I really, really like. And I think they're really good fits relative to what Vanderbilt wants to be. Maybe not the big names compared to some of these other SEC schools, but as we've seen, Vanderbilt doesn't necessarily need to have those big names to have success. Ricardo Jones is one of my favorite pickups for this class. I think that he did a lot of good things for Clemson, and now he's going to do the same thing for Vanderbilt this year. I think that Brian Allen is also a big win for them on the edge as well. You lose some talent on the defensive line. That's a position that could be very fun to watch this year. And again, other guys that you're going to really like, Jalen Davies, Michael Giada, guys who have experience and will be able to step in and hopefully embrace the culture at Vanderbilt. It's a great culture they have going on right now. They're in a great position to have more success, and they're bringing in guys that are going to help that. The last guy I'll talk about here, Javante Connor. I think that he's going to be the next great tight end for Vanderbilt. Replacing Eli Stowers is not going to be easy, but Javante Connor, after the year that he had with ECU, going to be that type of player, could be a very fun player to watch for Vanderbilt this year. Those are my SEC transfer portal grades. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and we'll see you in the next one.